Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. I'm Vered Kogan, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to Katrina Villarreal. Katrina is the Senior Vice President of Global Operations and Delivery at Lee Hecht Harrison. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with Lee Hecht Harrison, it's a global leading provider for career transition and mobility services. Katrina has over 20 years of experience providing services in the areas of recruiting, workforce planning, leadership development, change management, and outplacement support. And I got to know Katrina when I worked as an executive career coach for 3.5 years at Lee Hecht Harrison, starting in 2014. And I, got to coach individuals through their job transition to help them land as quickly, easily, and successfully as possible. And Katrina, it is such a pleasure to have you here on the show today because career transition, transitions in general, and specifically career transitions is such an important topic for people to be aware of because a lot of people struggle and it could be so much easier. I know certainly Lee Hecht Harrison has incredible services available to people. And I'm curious if we can start with how did you get into this line of work?
Thanks so much. I appreciate having you on the show today. How I got into career coaching and LHH overall is kind of funny because I came from the recruitment world. So, it makes sense after hiring people and really onboarding people into great jobs. I was always interested in seeing, well, how do we continue to develop them and see that full employment life cycle? So through some networking and actually connecting with one of my colleagues in a group company at LHH, I actually had the opportunity to come to work at LHH and love it because it really is helping people at often what is a difficult time in their life after having lost their jobs, being able to help them see what options are out there and helping them often transition into what turns out to be a better opportunity for them and perhaps their family. So it's really rewarding work, and we love to see people grow and develop in their roles.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I love that you also shared, that more often than not, people do land in opportunities that are even more aligned, even more fulfilling. And for those that are in transition now and, might have a more pessimistic outlook, to just know that there is a lot of support out there for you and that it can be easier. So would you be willing to share with us a little bit about the transition process? What do people need to know if they are either soon to be in career transition or job transition, or maybe are there now?
Yeah, absolutely. And people come into a transition in lots of different ways. Sometimes it's their choice in a voluntary separation process, and sometimes it's not their choice. And so that can often have different effects on how people approach that transition and kind of their mindset as they're coming into services. So I think reflecting on where you are in that process and understanding for that individual, okay, am I looking forward? Am I upset and looking back on what happened? Is really important to understand where you're at as you start to look forward. Our career coaches really work with people to understand that starting point for them, because some people come in and maybe they either made the choice or they saw maybe some writing on the wall and they're like, okay, I know what I want to do next. This is a great opportunity for me. I'm ready to take that search forward. And for those individuals, they can often quite quickly really look at, okay, moving from that transition emotion piece into really actionable process to take that next step. Other people need to take a moment and really reflect and go, okay, wait a minute, I don't know what I'm going to do next. For me, this might be just not a good financial time for myself or my family. They may be evaluating a few different things at the same time, and really needing to make some decisions before they can start in that process. And I think deciding that they're ready to start in that process is really important, because they have to be able to honestly answer that first question that you're going to get asked by a recruiter. Why did you leave your last job? And if their response is quite emotional and quite, oh, well, my company laid me off with 1,000 other people by email to get away with it. Unfortunately, there are some really challenging situations that have happened out there. That is going to come across to those recruiter with which often they might have empathy for, but they also are going to be concerned with that type of response. So we want to make sure that people are ready to, talk about, we call that the exit statement. And, what is that exit statement for you? And, the reality is you have to acknowledge what happened. My position was eliminated based on the situation that's happening in the tech industry, for example, right now, where, there's a lot of layoffs happening. Recruiters will understand them. So they will understand them. So acknowledging what happened and looking at, and this gives me the opportunity to search for, whatever that next job is, or whatever that position or that opportunity is for that particular individual. They can acknowledge and then really, look at what that opportunity is for them out of that situation. We call that their exit statement, and being able to do that positively is a really important first step for individuals who are in transition, because that's going to help them go from that position of looking backwards to that position of looking forward, and what opportunity could come from this situation.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is so important, because any transition, right, going from point A to point B, starts with first an ending of point A. And that's a mental, emotional ending. And also from an external perspective, right, communicating that through an exit statement in a very objective way, that we're not carrying, any resentment or anger or whatever it is, because then that can be perceived as something that could be projected moving forward and so on. And so it does require, sometimes that moment, as you said, to kind of just pause and find acceptance in that, and to look forward, right, to imagine what might be possible, even if we don't yet know when and how it's going to play out, but to just kind of ask ourselves, what if this was a great thing that happened for me, for my family, for my career, what if, right? And then the mind can begin to imagine possibilities, and it's easier to complete that last phase in their life, in their career. So thank you also for guiding us a little bit on what would be in that exit statement for people that are going through this. So once they've found some sense of acceptance with where they are, and they've written their exit statement, what would be kind of next in the process for them to be aware of?
Yeah. So again, I think it's a little bit unique for each person, but thinking about for the person that, okay, they know they've got that exit statement, they're ready to answer that question, but also knowing where that point B is that you mentioned. So what is that next step for them? And being able to talk through with someone is, I think, really important. And that's at LHH, we have our career coaches who work with individuals to do that. So whether it's with a career coach or with a trusted, colleague or friend, talking through your options is really important, because again, this is where there is an opportunity in every challenge, right? So you're in that situation, you get the opportunity to maybe do a little bit of exploration. And we're seeing in today's market where there's really a shifting in the economy. We're seeing baby boomers retiring faster in some ways, but also working longer. So we're seeing, again, kind of a dual thing happening right there. And then also the shift in the tech industry, where there was so much over hiring in the pandemic, where now there's a lot of competition for maybe our younger workers, and salaries are quite changing. So people are having to make decisions on, okay, it used to be an employee's market demanding what that salary will be. It's a little bit more of an employer's market right now in that particular industry. And we're seeing obviously banking challenges and things like that in the financial sector. So the market has shifted significantly in the last 10 months. So being able to really take an opportunity to step back and go, okay, what has this market now done to my employment opportunities? In some cases, it's created new ones. There's definitely also in all these changes in generative AI and all that is people are worried about it taking jobs. And right now it's creating jobs because there's a lot of focus on how is this going to even be implemented in companies and in software and technology and things like that. So there's a really good opportunity to sit back right now and review what is it that I want to do next. We're also seeing many more people, especially later career, choosing to do more of a portfolio career. So maybe they have a spouse or partner that has those health insurance benefits, or they're old enough to have other things taken care of. So they have more options, and they're looking at, okay, I'm going to start my own consultancy, do that on one piece, and maybe do some board work or volunteer opportunities on another. So we're seeing people really valuing how and when they work over the job that perhaps was the target before. So getting the title and things like that is, we're seeing for some populations, a little less important, and more of that flexibility and the ability to have more sense of control over both their schedules as well as the work that they do and the income that they make. They feel like they have more control in that portfolio career. So it's been quite interesting to see some of the shifts in certain demographic and certain industry sectors. So taking the time to sit back and make a decision, okay, it's next job for me. It's maybe starting my own company. Maybe it's doing a consultancy. Maybe it's taking an educational break. I want to totally shift my industry and I want to look at something completely new. Those are all good opportunities during this moment to take a breath and be able to reflect on those things and work through with someone that you trust. How do I take that next step if I'm interested in making a change right now?
Yeah, and that clarity about that point B is so important. We know that, in transition, the more targeted that we can be, the easier it is for us to position ourselves for that, to essentially sell ourselves for that which we want. So it is important to take the time and consider what is most important to me in my career at this point, which, as you said, may have shifted, and to maybe even rank that, right? What is most important in my career and so on, and making sure that whatever that next phase is aligned with what's important to us, with those values. What are some other, I'm curious, just kind of questions that we might be able to ask ourselves in determining what might be next for us?
Yeah. Well, one of the things, I mean, obviously, when you've lost employment, one of the first steps is how financially stable, like how much time can I give myself to make some of these decisions? Because that's honestly a first question that most people are asking themselves. So understanding, okay, I've got a nest egg put away, I'm okay, I can take 6 months for this, or I really need to move quickly. And so that's going to drive how much reflection time you can have versus taking the actions to take those next steps. Because we do see that most professionals, kind of in that professional level, take about 3 months to find a new position. And if you're in more of the executive level, it could be closer to 6 months. So we see that difference in those segments. So it is important to understand that even once you're ready to start that search, it does take a little bit of time, and different sectors take different amounts of time. So it's important to really consider that timing and what's important to you from both a financial and a activity basis, to know when you're ready to get started. Some people need a mental break and they just want to take a 2-week vacation or 6-month vacation or something and go travel the world. And if they have the resources and availability to do that, that is a wonderful opportunity for them. On the other case, some people need to mentally, they just like, I want to get back to work. I know what I want to do. I'm ready to get started. So I think making that decision first and foremost is really important. What is the timeline that you're allowing yourself to be in part of this process? It also then gives some structure to your search, because one of the things that we find that people are most anxious about when they're in a job search is that I no longer am going to work 8 to 5. I don't have a place to show up to, which now that so many of us are working hybrid, it may not be show up at something, but you have, no structure to that time. So important to give yourself structure. And so as you're starting to make those decisions, you have a timeline, also giving yourself a schedule, like, okay, from this time to this time every day, I'm going to be focused on my job search. And also taking care of the other parts of your life. I'm going to go exercise. I'm going to go spend time with my family. I'm going to go, whatever that is. But giving yourself a schedule helps you structure your way in a productive time to make sure you'll meet those goals.
Absolutely, because between that point A and point B is the transition. So we talked a little bit about the ending, but in the transition, it's important to hold on to some continuity from what was before. So the body's not in complete chaos, right? So as you said, giving some structure, right? So maintaining some habits that we had before. So there's a good balance between new and unknown and chaotic, right? But also very exciting and very creative time, and some continuity, right? What is staying the same, not just what is different. And that helps the body to feel a little bit more ease during the chaotic transition.
Absolutely. I would also say it's important to, from a resiliency perspective, to also make sure that you are understanding, and again, have that either trusted partner or coach that can help walk you through when challenges come up. Because what often happens in a search is the first few weeks, okay, you're getting your resume or CV together, you talk to all your key contacts, and you get a lot of traction in those first few weeks. And then it slowly dries up a little bit because you've done all the quick things that you knew to do. And now you need a little motivation to keep going. Or you've had those first interviews, which have probably been great practice, but you may not have interviewed for a while. And so you're like, okay, I need this practice. Now I know what I need to practice on more for the next time. And again, we know that it often takes as many as 25 conversations with a hiring manager to land a job. So that's a lot of conversations. So making sure that you have those conversations, that means that's 24 conversations that aren't going to lead to something. So that's dealing with rejection, understanding that it's not always about you. It's also about the company has a need, and sometimes it's a square peg in a round hole. So let's try to make sure that you're positioning yourself the right way so that you get that great opportunity we talked about earlier, and dealing with the ups and downs of the emotions when it's not the right fit too.
Yeah, to maintain that momentum, or build that momentum is so important. And when you were talking, it kind of reminded me not only of the many clients that I've had during transition, but the time that I was let go, right? There was a downsizing. My whole department years ago was laid off, and I had a 6-month engagement with a career coach. And that's why I decided to work at LHH as an executive career coach, because I remembered that. And what you're talking about, that roller coaster of emotions and the ups and downs, and it takes a lot of energy. And so it's important to build our energy as we're doing that, right? You mentioned like exercise, right? Making sure that we're caring for our own well-being, and of course, having structure to make sure that we're creating progress. I know LHH has wonderful measures for all of that to make sure that we're maintaining that momentum and acknowledging, celebrating ourselves for the effort, even if the results are not quite there yet. We're learning, we're getting better. But it can be a very challenging time, especially if there is financial hardship. I know for me, there was not my fault. I mean, I had good performance reviews. It had nothing to do with me. It was a merger that was going on in the company. But I remember feeling shame, feeling all kinds of emotions, like even just letting my husband, my parents know that this happened was just such a difficult thing. So really, my heart goes out to people that are in that place. It's not easy, and right, it does get better and easier. The key is to stay focused and take care of ourselves. So, yeah.
I just would share that too, that I think that support structure is so important, because just what you said, that it is a very challenging emotional time, and understanding that you're not alone, and you're often not the only person that this happened to, that there is a positive energy in that group environment and such, that having that structure in place. And again, whether it's a program like LHH, or often in the community, there's some community-based programs that can help support people to make sure that you're not alone. Because I think that is the greatest challenge for people, is to understand that there is no shame in that situation. The reality is I think the last stats I saw is that people will often be laid off now 3 times in their career. So for the people that are starting in their careers now, can expect to be laid off 3 times in their career. There's just so much change in our corporate business now, and those reactions. There's less of a stigma, which is very positive on that. Recruiters don't mind working with people, things like this, some historical baggage that maybe people who are more of the X generation might have in their mind. That's actually not so present for the younger generations in the workplace. And that's positive because it's really showing that it's the way of working and the way businesses are running businesses has changed. And by being part of a community that's going through a similar situation, you often can see that support and also help each other, because I may find out about a job that's not a good fit for me, but is a great fit for you. So how can I help share that and help do that with that networking and such?
Yeah, that's cool. And I'm curious, since you're very knowledgeable about trends, like what is the kind of average amount of time that an employee stays at a job these days? Do we have a statistic on that?
Gosh, I don't have that right off the top of my head. I do know that from a recruiter told me recently, though, that she'd been in recruiting for 15 years. And I know when it was about 16 years ago when I left recruiting. And back then, if I looked at something, I didn't really look at candidates who weren't at least 3 years in a job. And she was mentioning now, she goes, if I see more than a year at a job, I feel like they're stable. So that even just a year in a job shows stability. And it's interesting because now people are looking also at, well, did they do one job? Did they do multiple jobs at one time? How were they able to balance those things as that more gig and portfolio type career is becoming more prevalent too? So I think recruiters are, again, viewing the workforce differently, viewing how people are approaching work differently. And making sure that as part of your search, you're really evaluating companies as much as they're evaluating you, because those cultural fits and all those things are so important for kind of more longer term happiness. I think that's a really important step in that process as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you mentioned that. Even the mindset that we are interviewing them as much as they're interviewing us, right, as applicants. It's such a key mindset to have, because energetically it's like a pure level. And it makes such a difference for not only our confidence as applicants, but also I think in how we represent ourselves in I think energetically the trust factor of how much they trust us, right? Because it's not that we are needy job seeker over here, please give me a job, but rather, how can I add value, and how can you add value for me? Yes, kind of a two-way road. And that's a really cool mindset to have in mind, a more empowered mindset.
Absolutely.
So on the topic of mindset, before we kind of continue on that process, how important is mindset during a transition, a career transition?
Yeah, I think it's very important, because I think as candidates are making, these decisions and things like that, if your mindset is that you, one example I can share, we often have people who come in that are maybe later in career, over 50, who's going to hire me, or I have way too much experience, but I don't want that much responsibility anymore, but I'm overqualified for this job. I mean, there are some legitimate concerns in that conversation, but the mindset needs to be, look at this great value that I can add to an organization. And I can do that in a lot of creative ways, because I don't have to worry about, maybe as strong of a financial package as I maybe once did, or I've got these other options. So I have a lot more to offer in this scenario. So I think people having that right mindset and being able to come as a point of, as you mentioned earlier, adding value to the organization, not just, I need the organization to pay me. I think there's a little bit, it's a very different mindset, and you come across as a much more confident applicant and candidate for the company to interview. I also think that as, for example, more on the executive level, I think as they're thinking about transitions and such, it really is that kind of peer interview process. And I need to make sure that this organization is as much a fit for me as I am for them. And doing that with confidence without being cocky, I think is very important. And also making sure that there is that demonstration of value, no matter what role you're searching for, that you are bringing value to the organization. That is probably a real mindset that people need to have when they're in transition, and often one that someone who's been laid off maybe has a challenge of saying, oh, well, was I not adding value here? So that's why,
Yeah.
That is not the case in 99.9% of the situation. It's the company made this choice, and this is the situation for them. For you personally, you look to how you added value to that organization and incorporate that into your talk track as you're speaking with a company. And that just brings it demonstrates your value to the organization as you're going through the interview process, whether that's screening or the actual interviews. But I think it brings a different mindset to the interview whenever you have that as here's the value that I bring.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know even just in the process of doing their resume or LinkedIn profile, just writing out accomplishment statements. What did I actually achieve? Reminding ourselves, because oftentimes people, especially when they've been at a job for some time or have been very emotionally attached to a particular role, it's a part of their identity. And when that identity is no longer present, especially if not by choice, then it's like somebody ripped a part of us out. I mean, it's like losing a limb almost. It's very difficult, and it's something to grieve, as we've talked about earlier. And so their worthiness is attached to what was, but what was is no longer real. It's no longer present. And so it's really important to have conversations with people to remind ourselves, what have we accomplished, right? To sit down and list out and look at what we've done at those results, because oftentimes, especially when we're in distress, we forget the things that we have accomplished, all of our wonderful results and the rapport that we've built with people. Yeah,
exactly.
And so let's say they are, in that place where they've got some clarity of what they want. They've got some, a clear exit statement, as we said, a clear positioning statement that positions them moving forward for what they want. What would be kind of the next step in the process?
So then I think it's the conversations and the networking. That's really then when that comes up, because if you know the companies that you want to target, that what that next step is for you, then it's really about networking and having those conversations and not being afraid to share with someone, hey, you know what, this is what happened. I'm looking for this type of opportunity. And not asking people who's hiring, because I think that's always the challenge. Oh, do you know someone who's hiring? Well, that puts people on the spot, and people want to naturally help people, I think. So if you're actually talking to them and saying, hey, do you know someone who's hiring? That kind of puts them on the spot, but actually talking to them about, hey, I'm really interested in this company. Would you happen to know someone who's there that I could talk to and learn more about them? That puts people at a little bit more at ease. And then through that networking, you often find great connections. So I think really getting out and having lots and lots of those conversations is where you will find the best supports. Obviously, you have to do the work too of the day-to-day things, like talking to recruiters and talking to or being present on some of the job boards and things like that, depending on your level and your role. But making sure that you find those right connections to network with is really important.
Yeah, and I appreciate that you said, to feel comfortable with sharing with people kind of the situation and not specifically asking for a job, because, many of us might not have a job to hand over, but we may know somebody at one of the target organizations. And a part of this is trusting. I have to say, it's that sense of almost like a bigger faith that, it will work out. And that motivates us to keep going, because we don't know which point of conversation, who is going to, be the one that's going to lead us to ultimately the job. And oftentimes it happens in ways that we don't expect, like it happened for you.
Exactly. I was mentioning to you before that my conversation with one of my colleagues, I was actually just helping him understand more about a business and that we were working with. And after the conversation was over, he's like, you really need to come work for our side of the business. So I had the opportunity to change and come to LHH from one of our sister companies 16 years ago, and have been incredibly blessed to be here since. So it just has been through those conversations that, like you said, you don't always know where those conversations are going to lead. And I think it's also to have kind of that trust and faith that you were just talking about earlier, that people want to help people. I think that's a very natural experience. When someone reaches out that then you want to help them. So knowing that that is not taking advantage of that relationship, that's not anything. People want to be helpful. So if you make it easy for them to be helpful, they're gonna make it. They're gonna try to help you in any way they can.
I believe that wholeheartedly. And I think that when we do things like you did for your friend, without attachment, just supporting in whatever way, that too oftentimes seems to accelerate really delightful opportunities. And if nothing else, then at least we get to help, which too helps with our resilience, because the more that we get to help, that altruistic kind of intention, it tends to help us, heal from our own stuff, if there is some stuff that we've been carrying, or just feel more momentum, toward kind of moving forward and being more productive and doing the many things that we need to do in a job transition. So what other tips do you have for individuals in terms of those networking conversations? What works?
Oh gosh, I think that a lot of things work, and the key thing is to be out there talking to people. So it can be really easy, especially in our hybrid environment today, and a lot of people working from home, to maybe feel a little bit less comfortable than we were before about saying, hey, can we meet for coffee, or connecting with somebody to just say, hey, I'd love to talk more about what's going on at your company right now. Can we get together and have a 5-minute phone call? Something like that, where I think that people actually are craving that, because people have been so hybrid and working at home. They really are craving that interaction. So I think people are actually more accepting of that right now, because they really want to have that personal interaction with people. I also think that looking for professional conferences, speaking engagements, things like that, where you can, when possible, go in person and do those connections, because it is easier to catch those side conversation and personal connections that way. If that's not possible, either because of your type of industry or where you live or things like that, then doing that in a hybrid environment, and then getting to know, often they have networking centers and those virtual conferences and things like that, where you can try to connect with people. People know that that's how people are connecting now. So again, it is, I think, a little harder in making some of those personal connections that way. So it just means you have to do more of it and be prepared to do a little more to make those introductions, and making sure you're using all the tools that are available to you, like LinkedIn is a great resource and such, to making sure that you're out there connecting with people, joining communities, things like that as well. Yeah. And don't underestimate also personal connections for job search, because I think that's one of the things we often have, the people we meet at our kids' T-ball events or our church or our, PTA, whatever the situation is, you don't know where they work or where they might be able to give you a connection or something like that. So I think that those types of personal connections are also great opportunities to network as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Katrina, I know that there are wonderful services that Lee Hecht Harrison offers to people. Would you be willing to share with us what some of those services are and how we can connect and hopefully get some help?
Absolutely. So often career transition services are offered through an organization when they do have a reduction in workforce. So if your company has offered those outplacement services to you, please, reach out. LHH is often the service that's been offered. So you can find us at lhh.com and looking at the career transition services, and we'd be happy to connect with people. And if you are listening to this and perhaps you're in the business of having to make some of those decisions and make people redundant, then we'd certainly like to help those companies and do that as well. And again, contact information at lhh.com.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Katrina, for your time, for your wisdom, and for the support that you've given to everyone listening today.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a great day.